Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Outside the Echo Chamber, the Liberty Talk Hour on Rochester Free Radio, WRFZ 106.3 FM, with Kevin Wilson.
And Sean Phelan.
Yeah, and today we have a guest in the studio.
Woo.
All right, our guest is Arian Horbovetz. He's the author of a local blog, The Urban Phoenix, and has also been featured in publications like Strong Towns. He's made some other radio appearances locally. So, Arian, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right,
Who is this guy? What does he do?
Yeah. Hey, who are you? What do you do?
So, The Urban Phoenix is basically, I started this about a little over 3 years ago. And I started the blog, actually, it was kind of weird how it happened. I wanted to go to small upstate New York cities and talk about the revival that was happening in places that you would never think that revivals were happening, in places like Utica, Binghamton, Schenectady, places that if you ask the average Rochesterian, right, these places are getting better. They're taking incremental steps to regrowing their community through small business ventures, through local pride, things like that. If you said that to the average Rochesterian, they'd say, no, it's not happening there.
Oh.
So, but, I wanted to kind of paint a picture of this and show people that this stuff was actually happening. And I really did not mean for this to get as big as it has, but it's just been wonderful how people have embraced it. The communities that I visit, including here in Rochester, I do a lot of writing about Rochester as well. They love to hear about the interesting things that are happening as far as urban rebirth and revitalization in our communities. So while it started as this thing, talking up these cities, now as I've become more familiar with urbanism and how real, actual, incremental, practical urbanism works. Now I'm writing a little more about what can we do better. What in our communities can we do to improve our situations? What can we do to improve sustainability, financial solvency in our cities? What can we do to bring our cities also back to the people and back to empowering people, small business owners, medium-sized business owners? And that's kind of what I've gotten into as far as what I'm writing now. That's what it's kind of evolved into. So it's been a wonderful journey, and it continues, and I'm really excited for this to continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I first started reading your blog in part because I'm from the Rome, Utica area, and a lot of people told me, oh, you need to run away from that area. There's nothing good happening here. So I love that because I see like my hometowns, Oriskany, New York, right in between Rome and Utica, like trying to embrace and grow their cities in a meaningful way and build meaningful community. But could you define a little bit what urbanism means? I mean, you kind of talked about it a bit, like what?
Sure. I mean, it has many different definitions, but I would say, the traditional, almost new urbanism, the words that go along with it, and it's been tremendously overused, so I'm just going to say these words and I'm going to explain it. Live, work, play, right? So the idea is to get back to more kind of a centralized urban living style. So the idea is minimizing sprawl, because we have so much of that from our cities that's really sucked the life out of our cities, sprawling into second and third tier suburbs and things like that. We want to get back to building cities for people. We have built cities for entertainment for 50 years. We've built cities for cars for 50 years. Mm-hmm. We've built every possible way. We've built cities every possible way to get out of them. And that's been the problem, is we haven't built cities for people. We've built them for cars. We've built them as places where you go to for an evening and then leave. The idea is to create a more livable atmosphere in our cities where you can walk the streets safely, where we can create a strong cycling culture. And I know that's something that a lot of people don't quite understand how that affects, urban growth, but it does when you really look at it. It's basically combining, it's centralizing everything. The idea is to create a space where you could essentially live, work, and play in the same area. You could walk, you could take public transit, make everything efficient, make everything close by and approachable, no matter what your status in life is. And that's, in large part, what the urban movement is trying to do.
Well, I mean, that when you put it that way, it sounds mighty reasonable. That's no, so it's great. I mean, because the the way a lot of our cities are structured, including like an area that I grew up in, is it's okay. Maybe you go to the city to work or whatever, and then you drive home to the suburbs, and then that's it. And then maybe you drive back to the city to go to a coffee shop or a bar, and then to me and to many people, that's just the way things are and always have been. And you look, at the city of Rochester too, and how we've like built the structure around here with 490, 590, 390, the inner loop.
Sure.
We've built the structure of our city around moving people through it, not necessarily into it.
That's right. And it's interesting because it has been like that for about 60 years, 50, 60 years. Before that, it wasn't that at all. People lived centrally because they had to. There just wasn't quite the mobility. Cars were just in their infancy for the most part. And, I talk a lot about subsidy. The government did a huge, you could look at it as service or disservice to this country, whatever angle you wanted to come from it, in building highways through our city. So we cut our cities in half in so many places. You talk about the inner loop and, here in Rochester. And what an urbanist would tell you is that the inner loop, while making it convenient to get around the city, now you're kind of circling the city above and below it. You're not experiencing the city at surface level. So it did a couple of things. One, if you're driving around or through the city, you don't actually see the city anymore. You don't see that shop that's on the corner. You don't see that cool building or that iconic space in the city. You're just driving through and around it and maybe spitting out wherever you need to go. And that's the only piece of the city you're seeing. On the ground level, these kind of expressways and the inner loop and things like that, they act as kind of moats. When you think about like a moat around a castle, that's kind of the effect that they have on communities. So these things tore apart communities and neighborhoods. I mean, the Skajakwita in Buffalo is such a great example.
You shouldn't curse on the air.
I know. I always feel wrong when I say that word.
Yeah, sounds
like you've. Do we have to bleep that?
Yeah, I think you should anyway.
Yeah.
Dump the audio.
It's a swear word in urbanist circles.
If there's any doubt, just do it.
Yeah.
So I think there's this idea that we have gotten in this, I don't want to say rut, but we have gotten in this habit of seeing cities as places we go that are temporary, that we live somewhere else, that we, kind of live our lives somewhere else, but that's just a place we go to occasionally.
Yeah.
We want to get back to the possibility, maybe in 20 years, of feeling comfortable about raising your family in a city setting, and about having the amenities, the family amenities, the personal amenities that you might have in your small town back in a city again. And that's the truly, that's the goal. That's the truly wonderful thing that I think a true urbanist wants to see, is that construct that you don't have to live so far away anymore. To create a city whereby it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is, you have transit to get to where you need to go. You could walk, you could bike, you can drive your car, you can get around an area in a lot of different ways. And the way to do that is to centralize and to make that a priority.
Yeah. And I do want to hit on some, because you had started to mention subsidies, you kind of mentioned centralization, right? And keeping people close. And one of the things that I want to talk about, because you had mentioned subsidies, is like how we structure. All right, and I want to follow up with one of the things that you did mention. You started talking about subsidies in there, and living centrally and living close together and everything. And I think one of the things that, at least to people in our audience who are libertarian who may not understand, is how that ends up operating. How the structure that we've built in terms of car-oriented transportation ends up being subsidized by government at various different levels. That when we build highways and infrastructure out to the suburbs, that's expensive.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. It's amazing that this is the biggest kept secret, I think, in this country, in expenditure in this country. I hear from a lot of people, because I love to ride Amtrak, right? And I hear from a lot of people that say, I don't want to ride Amtrak because it's government subsidized. And then they get in their cars, and that makes me laugh, because there is
Pretty sure I've said that.
But it's true. People don't really think about that, right? We get in our cars, we drive on highways. our highway structure, our local roads, everything that we drive on, we don't really pay for that. And it says, oh, there's that gas tax, and there's, I pay for it this way or that way. You really don't. It doesn't touch it. It doesn't come close. And the big secret in this country is that our road system is one of the most heavily subsidized pieces of American culture. When you think about it, and I say American culture because to drive is like an American thing, right? It's a rite of passage. It
represents independence and being able to get around where you need to go.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. It's a symbol of independence. It's a symbol of freedom that we have in this country. But when that freedom is paid for with money that, to be honest, what we pay in taxes doesn't even come close to. You see it in our road structure. You see it when you drive under these bridges. Yeah. We are not making the money in this country that can actually pay for to bring this infrastructure that we've built back up to even close to standard.
Yeah. No. We there's enough money around. It's just we use it for all the wrong things.
Wrong reasons. Exactly.
That's part of it.
The fact is, our road structure is not self-sustaining, and it's far, far from it. It is one of the most closely kept secrets in this country, and it's something that when I even mention it, it's amazing the negative feedback I get. Yeah. Because people don't want to realize it. They don't want to see this truth. And it's not just roads. I mean, we're talking about if you live 20 miles from a city, from a central location, you talk about that's 20 miles of water pipes you have to pay for. That's 20 miles of power infrastructure you have to pay for. Who's paying for that? Where is that coming from? Your tax dollars aren't your housing, your property tax is not paying for that. It's that has to all get figured into what we have to pay for this country. So the idea of living more centrally is minimizing those expenditures that we've now realized we've dug ourselves such a hole into that we can't get out of.
Yeah, and I think like the area where I grew up, we were on Rome City Water and like Rome Sewer and things like that. But we were way the heck out. We were a 20-minute drive from what I considered Rome, right? And now thinking back, and I wonder, like, man, did our property taxes even cover that? Like, do we ever recover the money for building the infrastructure to be able to do that?
It's a funny thing. A lot of things I like to say to kind of explain this kind of stuff, and this is very simplistic, so forgive me. But if anyone has ever played SimCity, I think maybe everyone has played some sort of city simulation game. Okay, they always say build centrally because you have to build roads and you have to build power lines and you have to build pipes. So if you build a city over here and then something a mile away in SimCity mileage, whatever it is, you have to still pay for that piping and for that water delivery and all that. You're still paying for that to go a long way away, but there's nothing in between those two things that makes it efficient. That actually,
So yeah, and in that scenario, you can see like, oh wow, this is a lot of money. It's not worth it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But the way we've structured things here is, well, we end up doing it anyway. We end up subsidizing it and I think again back to like Rome, New York, like when the Walmart was built on the edge of town there, like with their huge footprint and all the infrastructure that had to go into servicing such a large retail store like that, like is that sustainable? They had to make the road adequate to be able to get out there. They had to build the gas lines, the water lines, the power lines to be able to service that.
Sure. Right. And the effective, you talk about Walmart, the effective Walmart is not just, we talk about the amount of money you can make per square foot in a retail space, in a store, in whatever, right? You don't think about the footprint. So you're not only in that area of Walmart, you're not only talking about the store, you're talking about the massive parking lot, which is usually about 1/3 full. You're talking about the land around it that it takes to build on that, and all the stuff that you just talked about to get resources there to make sure that people get there, to make sure that utilities get there, and everything like that. And here's the other piece too. Now that everyone says, "Oh, this is great. Now I can buy cheap stuff." Well, say there's a hardware store in town that now goes out of business now because people can get their basic hardware supplies in a Walmart for cheaper. Now you've just while you've created all these $9-10 an hour jobs, now you've just put full-time workers out of business that bring money into the community and keep it there. And that's kind of the Walmart effect. That's what that kind of situation does. And like you said, subsidized usually.
Yeah. And actually, one day, because we had started talking about like the infrastructure part of it, like in terms of like roads and bridges, because that's why I hear a lot of people talk about, like especially people who are like running for Congress. They'll say like, "Oh, we're not spending enough money on infrastructure. Our roads and bridges are crumbling."
But my roads,
yeah. And there's this joke among libertarians that we hate roads, right? Like that whenever we get to a political discussion, we're like, "Yeah, we want to reduce the size of government." They say like, "Oh, but who'll pay for the roads? Who'll build the roads, right?" But and I've taken this to the logical extreme and decided to actually hate roads and become a market urbanist. But no, but
Oh my.
yeah, but no, I don't hate roads. But there's this great series.
they really need to flatten that grass on Main Street. You know, it's a little bumpy.
right. No, just ride over it. It's fine. Like the market will provide. But there's this
The
great
market will provide the stones to.
Yeah, right.
We'll
Like
be
it'll be like
back to
Flintstone
cobblestone.
cards, and we'll just like flatten it out, and it'll be fine, and it'll be organic and awesome, and then we'll ride our bikes over it.
Yes.
It's good.
Yes.
Yeah. No. See, now he's out. Now
Now
Arian's on
tire
board.
bikes and go.
Yeah, but you
There
know,
we go.
bicycles and cobblestones, you know, they don't go together.
Oh,
well.
they do if you have the right bike. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, you just gotta know what you're doing. But
My fat rear end.
no, ride your bike. Be good.
Crush those poor little bicycles.
Anyway, there's this series that I encourage y'all to check out. It's on Strong Towns, the infrastructure Ponzi scheme. And what it kind of talks about is like the reason why we're talking about like this being unsustainable and why you're seeing the infrastructure crumbling is because what had happened way back in the 1960s is the federal government said, all right, local governments, places like Rochester, Chi-Li, or Gates, that we will give you these subsidies to build roads in your town, and you can build them, and we'll make sure you have all the tools you need to do this. You just have to pay for the maintenance and the repair once that time comes up. So they got all these subsidies to be able to build these roads, figuring that, well, if we build these roads, we'll bring businesses and homeowners and all these people here who will be able to pay taxes to eventually be able to sustain those areas. Well, as it turns out, in a lot of places, that didn't happen. That they built all this infrastructure that now can no longer be paid for and is going into disrepair.
Absolutely.
And so that's what ended up happening. Is we made this bet a while ago to do that, and now that we're in our second cycle of the infrastructure, it's starting to look bad. So the solution to a lot of people, including President Trump and a lot of members of Congress, is we'll just pay for it again.
Right.
And so in this time though, a lot of that money is going to be bonds, right? It's going to be debt. So how many cycles can we do? I mean, maybe my great-grandchildren have to worry about that, and that's not my problem, but...
Right. And that's the question we have to continue to ask ourselves. The way we move about, first of all, our country is about to change. In the next 20 years, the way we get from point A to point B is going to change drastically.
Hover cars?
Absolutely.
Hover cars? Finally?
Why not?
Finally? Jetsons?
I have
We're
no
here?
I have no idea. But you talk about driverless cars.
Yeah.
That's going to change the way. That's
Yeah.
going to change the way we see our cities, build our cities, move about our cities. Not just our cities. I mean, our communities everywhere.
Yeah.
That's going to change a lot of things. How exactly that's going to change is going to. There's a lot of variables in that, but it will change somehow. You talk about ideas like a hyperloop or high-speed rail or any of these other things that are coming, I guess, and it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of materialize. But we're going to move about our country very differently going forward. And you talk about subsidizing this again, another 50 years of this same old infrastructure. Let's talk about innovation. Let's talk about having the foresight to see innovation in this country and to see where that's going to take us. Because if we like you said, throw a whole bunch of money into keeping up this same way of getting around our country when there's other possibilities brewing, more innovative, more efficient, more interesting ideas brewing. What are we saying about America? What are we saying about this country? We're saying we're just going to build to stagnate? No, that's
No.
not.
Well, it's comfortable, and they feel it works.
Exactly,
Right,
exactly. But we got to where we are because we didn't remain comfortable. We pushed ourselves.
Yeah.
We innovated and we moved to different things. And on that, I kind of want to, when I talk about innovation, I'm not talking. So it's really interesting. The things you're kind of talking about. I talk about what I call manufactured urbanism.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that your listeners probably are familiar with and associate with this kind of urbanistic idea.
What is your definition of that, please?
Manufactured urbanism, for me is, okay, so I go into a lot of these towns and I see this small business, mid-sized business, homegrown, incremental growth approach. Okay, so it's taking these cities that were like Utica that were completely vacant for a very, very long time, and business owners, small business owners, are going in and taking a risk, and they're opening a coffee shop, and then next to that, a farm-to-table restaurant opens up, and maybe another restaurant, and people start coming downtown, and then you see lofts, and you see this kind of progressive, small-scale investment. Small to mid-sized scale investment in the city, and it's creating this local pride, right? Because people are saying, "Hey, we're back. We're doing some good things. It's fantastic." And then what you see is big money starts coming in, big investment. Local government officials want to put their stamp on this process, on this growth, because people see where they can capitalize on a movement, right? And that's a good thing, but then you have to ask yourselves, are the things that now were these big entertainment districts that were plopping down in these areas, that were experiencing this wonderful small business growth and this incremental growth that was matching kind of the growth of the city, is this too big too fast? Or is this sustainable? Is this being subsidized? Is this smart now, or is it smart in 20 years or 50 years? Is this going to last? And what I talk about manufactured urbanism is this kind of rush to build something big that doesn't fit what's already happening there. And we're seeing this here in a lot of places in Rochester. Urbanism at its core happens organically and naturally, and it all revolves around small business growth and local pride and people living in their cities, moving back to their cities, and empowering the areas that they live in and patronize, right? The most hated word for me as an urbanist is the word destination. We're going to create a destination in our cities, right? That's manufactured urbanism. We want to get back to not just cities, but communities that we build. We want to get back to building places for us. I don't mean in an isolationist way. I mean in a way that welcomes other people, but that prioritizes the people that already live there. Yeah. That's what we've gotten away from in our city. And prioritizing people coming in, the inside or the outside in approach, bringing people from the outside, that they must, tourism and things like that must sustain our city, that approach always fails because A, it's typically subsidized, and B, it's just it creates this message that to our residents and our citizens, you are not good enough to support it. So we've got to bring in people from the outside. We want to welcome those people, but prioritize the people that already live there.
Yeah. It sounds like the Rochester Jazz Festival and the Fringe Festival, and
see, those are okay, but I'm betting Arian can think of a specific example. we'll take a quick break, and then we'll see if we can ask him if there's something that comes to mind when he's talking about building a destination. All right, so again, you're listening to Outside the Echo Chamber on Rochester Free Radio. We'll be back in just a minute. All right, welcome back. You're listening to Outside the Echo Chamber, the Liberty Talk Hour on Rochester Free Radio, WRFC.
Can you listen online?
106.3 FM. Yes, you can listen online too at rochesterfreeradio.com. And we will have a podcast of this without music on OutsideTheEchoChamber.show.
.show.
Not .com. OutsideTheEchoChamber.show. And we're here with our guest, Arian Horbovetz, who's author of the Urban Phoenix and frequent contributor to blogs like Strong Towns. And we're talking about urbanism. And we were talking before the break about some of the projects that might come to mind when you're talking about, like, because what ends up happening, right, is politicians see the excitement around, like, the revitalization of an urban core or a neighborhood or whatever, and sometimes big companies too, and developers, and they're like, yes, we need to get in on this, and they may be genuinely excited about that, but then they're like, all right, well, we want to build a legacy project, we're going to do something really big that no one else can do, and it's going to fix everything.
Yes.
Does it fix everything, Arian?
No,
You mean
of course not.
You mean like that fast ferry?
Yeah. I could name some projects, but I'm not going
Go
to.
ahead. Go ahead. Name them.
No,
The important thing is this is the one thing I see over and over again with these large scale projects that promise all these things to our cities is they typically fall very, very much short. Because what are the big things that people just gravitate to? First of all is jobs. Jobs. You can say this a million times. People want jobs. They don't want to think critically about what those jobs are, how much those jobs are going to pay, whether they're temporary or whether they're permanent.
it's going to create 300 jobs downtown,
Right.
and
it's actually 6 full-time jobs or something
Yeah,
like
right.
that, And hey, for those 6 people, that's great, that's fantastic. But the promises that these large-scale projects usually fall very, very short. The other thing I want to talk about with a lot of these projects is people think that there's always this no matter what happens, there's going to be this effect where people are going to go to this destination that they're now going to spend $100 billion plus on, and that those people are going to go to that place and then they're going to filter out afterwards or beforehand, a performance or whatever, to all these different businesses outside the area, right?
Yeah.
That naturally they're just going to go to the restaurants, they're going to go to the stores, they're going to go to the shops that are all around there. That doesn't always happen.
No.
And the reason is a lot of people that go to, for example, a baseball game downtown. Now, I love the Rochester Red Wings. I love them. I'm glad we have them. They're fantastic. But how many people you sit out in the parking lot? 90-some% of the people that filter after a game, they're not going out afterwards. They're families. They're going home.
Yeah.
They're going home to their suburban homes.
Yep.
And they're not really I mean, look around the area. There's not a whole lot
like
around
the High
Frontier
Falls
Field.
district,
The High Falls district,
which is the closest thing.
talk
yeah.
about a subsidy.
Yeah.
A tremendous amount of resources spent in trying to build that up, and it didn't work because you can't create islands of you can't just plop down a destination without leading people there. You need to kind of create a natural path for people to almost travel if they want to go from this place to this place to this place. You can't simply plop a whole bunch of money down in an area and expect that financial, that money is just going to spread
Just
around.
build it and
the
they
area.
will come,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
All right, so we plop down this neighborhood and have a bunch of subsidies there, and then the businesses will come in, the people will come in, and then it's going to be a strong area. And,
You mean like building a stadium in the hood?
Sure. I mean, that's
well, that's what ends up happening though. A lot of times, like with these sports stadiums, that's the promise. Like, all right,
It
well,
is.
we're gonna knock down all these people's homes. We're gonna knock down a neighborhood that's already there, and then what ends up happening is like, oh, well, all these businesses will come up. It's gonna improve your neighborhood, and
Right.
it doesn't usually work out the way.
Whether you believe trickle down economics works or not, I can guarantee you trickle down urbanism does not.
Yeah.
When it's manufactured, when it's on a large scale, it can if done right. So, for example, where something like a theater downtown does work, where I find, is in a place like Schenectady. So Schenectady has Proctor's Theater, and they have built the most walkable downtown I've been to in upstate New York. You'd never really guess that if you haven't been there in a while. They have the widest sidewalks. They have a little city street called State Street that welcomes you. It really welcomes you. You sit there and you're like, it feels like you're in New York, but not in an approachable New York, where there's lights and there's hustle and bustle and there's people on the streets, but it's very approachable and it's very friendly, and it welcomes you to walk out of. You can literally walk out of that theater and walk next door to a place, to 3 or 4 places, and grab a drink or grab an ice cream or grab something, just a quick finish to the evening. You can't manufacture that. That was all built naturally kind of around this common center. And that's the beautiful thing of it. If you tried to do that and just plop that same thing, try to build that, unorganically somewhere else, it's not going to work. It happens naturally. It's something, and that's the hardest thing for people to realize, is that when you try to force that, it typically doesn't happen.
See, that's a big difference between here and Rochester and Schenectady. There, you come out of a venue here in Rochester, and you try to walk around downtown or Main Street, whatever, and there's not really anything to do, and except maybe be careful that like part of a building doesn't fall on you. You know?
I mean, but there are neighborhoods in Rochester that,
Yes.
that do have that, right? Like
Absolutely.
if you go to the cinema in Swilberg, like
Yes.
there's some nice places around there.
Definitely,
I don't like that intersection, but
No.
yeah,
Right.
it's terrible to ride your bike through. But it is an area that has a lot of shops, restaurants. You could go to a theater, then stop by the Ethiopian place down the road,
Absolutely.
and
It's like the all-night Chinese place right there.
yeah.
We still have some wonderful neighborhoods, east side, west side, north, south. There's some
Yeah.
fantastic neighborhoods. Some people are very familiar with, some people aren't. And there's some wonderful things that are happening there. But the things that are making these neighborhoods, that are reviving these neighborhoods, are organic efforts. They're not subsidized. They are driven by, like I said, small to mid-sized businesses. They're creating natural destinations where people within those neighborhoods and within the city want to go to. They're not necessarily catering to somebody that lives 20 minutes away. And again, everyone will welcome that business openly. But the idea is to build for your neighborhood, build for that area, and create that kind of increment.
I see that in the South Wedge a lot.
Absolutely.
Especially
great area.
the way Alexander between South Clinton and South Avenue is starting to develop.
That's
There's
my
little
neighborhood, yeah.
restaurants,
Yeah.
and
It's a good
and
area.
stuff popping up.
Things
and-
are going well in North Winton Village too.
North Winton Village is just really slamming right now.
It's my neighborhood.
Great to
I
see.
love it. And I'm able to walk around all over the place and walk to Radio Social, walk to Winton Air, walk to
Radio
Triumph City
Social's
Tavern, all these great businesses there in the area, and but it's interesting, like just like how like that, because that's organic, that's natural. Like some of the people in the neighborhoods are like, oh, we don't get like the big subsidies like College Town gets. I'm like, well, College Town comes with,
isn't doing so great right now.
and
Yeah, you guys are lucky. I mean, I live in the 19th ward. The only thing I get at night is police presence.
yeah, I mean, but the way it's going to come out is like the neighborhood coming in, like encouraging some small businesses to show up and invest in the neighborhood. It's got to happen organically. Like if they try to do a big project, it'll probably just displace a lot of people, drive up prices, and collapse.
Well, this is that whole
absolutely
Larry
right.
Sharp thing again. I mean, it's just we have to make an environment that it makes it easier to open up small businesses, and you could end up really changing areas and having I would love to see more of the corner stores, the mom and pop shops, that kind of stuff, and not 7-Elevens and
Absolutely.
and everything else.
I think it's really interesting because I'm personally not a libertarian, but I think I know.
Yeah.
The ideas.
Get out.
The ideas.
Kevin, how did this man get on the show?
All right, I'll walk out
Did
the
we
door
or did
now,
we
it's
not
fine.
vet people? I mean, hasn't our current government proven to us that we need to vet before?
But here's
go ahead.
here's the beauty of it. I know, right?
All right, no, he can just talk now. I'm tuning him out.
Yeah, I know.
He's not
I know.
a libertarian.
You can just walk away. Just there's a little glass here. You can just smash right through it. No, the things that I talk about as far as urbanism, and I think people's perception is this big kind of, like I said, this manufactured urbanism perspective. Urbanism at its core really shares so many of the same philosophies as libertarianism. I really believe it's just simplifying everything, simplifying our zoning. That's
Yeah.
a big
Oh,
piece
yeah.
of it. Simplifying, all the kind of just getting rid of the red tape that it gets that we can create growth, build environments where people can empower their own neighborhoods and their own areas. Something I love about Geneva, New York, is I talked to their Chamber of Commerce, their local government there when I visited there, and they use a great thing. They said, we give people the tools to help and harness the power of their own neighborhoods in our city, and they do that so well. They're all on the same page, or at least it appears that way, to empower people in their cities to make the changes that they want to see. They're not going to do it for them. They're relying on the pride in their city. And you know what? When folks get down to making these changes in their neighborhood, that creates pride, and that creates that kind of thing that we want to get back to. That we love where we live, and we want to protect it. We want to upkeep it. We want to make it great. And for me, the true core of libertarian kind of philosophy matches very much up with that kind of make sure that people have the tools to do what they need to do, and people will do it.
Right. And so you can build that community, and you could do it in a more sustainable way.
Absolutely.
by doing that organically.
Yes,
by allowing that growth to happen instead of
you build with what you have instead of what you project you will have.
Yeah,
One of the saddest things that happened that I saw and happened in my community in the 19th Ward was watching Hunt's Hardware close.
The local hardware store, sure.
Not just local. I mean, that place had been around like 120 years.
Of course.
I mean, it was, wow.
There's very few left.
You know, and it was so nice being able to just go like 2-3 blocks and pop up to the local store and, you know, the hardware store. And this place was smart. I mean, smart on a whole nother level. They knew the way the houses were built.
Yes.
They had the hardware for the local houses. They had the window sizes for the local houses. They had the doorknobs and the hinges for the houses, you know, and they even knew the breaker box in my house when I went to get a breaker, and they just asked me how many amps and what street did I live on. That's all they asked for. How they knew what breaker I needed. You know, and that's that is marketing to your clientele in a localized area, which should have made them a huge success, and it did for 100 years or so. But watching them go under was so sad.
But the things you talked about, that spirit is what we're trying to get back to, because we really lost touch with that personal approach, right?
Yep.
And that's what neighborhoods are all about. It's about knowing. You know, it's about knowing your neighbor. It's about your local business, knowing what you need and what you want specifically.
There's a woman on my street that sells vegetables in the summer out of her garage.
Yeah.
And I'll be
beautiful.
Damned. I mean, yeah, sure, I'll go to Walmart, I'll go to Wegmans, whatever.
Sure.
And they've got much better looking, you know, fruits and vegetables, but I will not buy them there. I will buy them at the end of the street, even though they're a little sadder looking.
Yeah.
They're cheaper.
Yeah.
And it's local. That's local. You know what I'm saying?
Local.
That's about as local
That's
as
there.
it gets. But that's the way I feel that like almost every neighborhood should be. You should be able to like have that corner store again where, you know, there's fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, you know, and not another, you know, 7-Eleven or a Burger King or
completely
something
agree
on the corner.
You know what? I don't like, you know, a lot of times when you go in that direction, you start talking about those things. A lot of people think, oh, then another contingent says, oh, you're an obstructionist, that you don't believe in actual growth, that you don't want things to change, that you don't want.
Yeah.
And you need those things, right? We all need a little bit of change, a little bit of growth.
Yeah.
We need them the right way. We need to be critical. We need to think critically about what that change is, how it's going to directly affect the people that live there, instead of being wowed by the glitz and glamour of a new project coming in. We have to make sure that the things that we're supporting are the things that are really actually going to support us in return.
Yeah. Well, and I'm like, that's a discussion happening in my neighborhood, North Winton Village right now. It's like, do we stop growth? Do we keep it the neighborhood character, or do we allow like incremental growth and kind of change and build with the times, right? Like how do you manage that in an area where they have pride in their community now, but how is that?
Growth can happen, and growth can happen anywhere if you nurture it in the right way. And I think that's the biggest point, is the nurturing in the right way. Because, I mean, if you end up with an uncontrollable growth that does not serve the community, by definition, that's cancer.
Right. And, you know, the other thing that I'm actually writing a piece on is, what is growth? So we always talk about growth. We talk about growth all the time, and we talk about normally we talk about it from an economic perspective or from a population perspective. And when I'm talking about growth to you, I'm assuming that we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Growth to people can be a very different concept. Am I talking about growing local pride? Am I talking about growing, strictly an economic base? Am I talking about growing a population? Am I talking about growing an area over here without, growth can be a number of different things, and it could be a number of different things collectively. It's not a one-dimensional thing that we talk about. So some growth can be very, very strong. Some growth can be very, very bad for a community, or growth for these people can mean, a horrible situation for these people.
To me, growth is about richness. And I don't mean money.
Yes.
That could be one of the definitions. Richness of the culture, richness of the community, richness of the pride in the neighborhood. That to me is growth.
That is my same definition. The unfortunate thing is, I wouldn't say that most people would agree. I would say that most people, and I completely 100% agree with you. I love that you said that. I'm actually going to write that down for my piece. But
quote me.
Yeah, exactly. I will. I will quote you warmly and
You'll hear from my
accurately.
lawyer.
But I would hesitate to believe that that's how most of our population would determine growth.
Yeah.
I think people think that just, as long as we're making money, however that is, or as long as we're gaining population, however that is, those are the markers for success. That's not necessarily the case. The things that you're talking about are much more complex and require much more critical thinking.
Community effort.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think communities should also have more of a say of what businesses can come and what businesses they want, as opposed to getting a few.
I don't know.
Oh,
We might actually have a disagreement. No,
That's a tough one.
All right, so I'll give you an example because there's a case that of a neighborhood. It was brought up at a many neighbors building neighbors meeting, and someone wanted to open up a vape shop in the neighborhood, and then like the neighborhood chair was at this meeting and started like yelling at the chief of police and was like, "No, you can't. You should have asked us. We don't want this business in our neighborhood. We need to shut it down." And like they're gonna bring all sorts of like terrible people into the area. And
I think you took it the opposite way I meant that.
yeah,
I meant that as not restricting the businesses that can come in, but to actually get the neighborhoods to encourage the businesses that they want.
I see.
So in
Yeah.
other words, saying,
Okay. So
like,
you're-
my neighborhood could really use an Italian restaurant. There just isn't an Italian restaurant in my neighborhood. There's a need for it. It would be great if we could, an entrepreneur who's interested in opening up an Italian restaurant, that we could, say in the 19th Ward and go and say, hey, let's pursue this guy. Let's get him in here. Let's see what he proposes, and then draw that business because that's the business that we want in that neighborhood.
Sure.
As opposed to the vape shop saying, no, we're banning that.
Yeah.
No. That's just ignorance. You don't ban a business from coming into your neighborhood
Sure.
unless it's going to be like ridiculously disruptive.
well, there's
you know.
they're just like high impact businesses that
Right.
they're a little bit more understandable. We had an issue with that in our neighborhood with like a transportation business that got a bit out of hand and started using up all the street parking and.
Yeah, I
Yes,
mean,
yes.
you end up like, somebody's got tractor trailers parked on, a residential neighborhood streets.
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
right.
just because it's,
Yeah.
that's not the kind of business,
Right.
But, the thing is, like I said, if, you want a business in your neighborhood, you want, you're tired of seeing that corner store empty, and believe me, that drives me crazy when I see so many corner stores empty and stuff. But, and you could say, you know what, let's actively, we need we need a pizza place, or we need a Chinese restaurant. We need something, and I think that's something that I think the neighborhood should be a little more proactive about.
Just very quickly, you mentioned a vape shop, and a lot of people, I think people sometimes have a very poor definition of that kind of a place, and wherever
Yeah.
you stand on this. I read something where they're actually good for neighborhoods because they bring people in, and people kind of hang out there.
Yeah.
And
make 'em lounges.
Exactly. It kind of makes them a little more comfortable with being there and being comfortable with the area and everything like that. So, and those people tend to, there's evidence to show that those people kind of will, walk out of there and go to the place next door for some food, or go to, that those
Yeah.
people are the kind of people that are going to just hang out in a neighborhood and spend time there and ultimately spend money there.
Yeah.
And that actually can be good for the structure of a neighborhood. It's something to kind of keep people there, keep people in.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting thought on that because I know a lot of people are they don't like that. They don't want that in their neighborhood.
Yep,
and,
yep. It's a very
Can't wait for
it
the
splits people.
legalization of marijuana because those
he's
little
gonna
lounges, those little lounges are going to be like, all of a sudden you're going to notice like, oh, the taco place next door is booming, Oh,
We
I-
can't have a libertarian show without mentioning weed once.
right?
The cupcake place next door like triples their profits.
Yeah, right.
That's what I'm saying. All of a sudden, like this, little Snapple outlet or something. That's like selling drinks. Like 50,000 drinks
it.
a year. All of a sudden,
Bring it on.
Hey, man, that's great. So I did want to make sure we covered one of the topics that I think it gets brought up every time. Like I mention like urbanism to libertarians is like, oh man, they're just wasting money on bike lanes that no one's going to use. And I bet you even rode your bike here today, didn't you, Arian?
I actually I got dropped off.
Oh my goodness! I
But
asked that the one time you did.
I know, seriously. No, I'm riding my bike
is in
home.
the shop.
I'm car free, so I do love our Pace bike share here.
Yeah.
It's a great thing for me. I use it as transit. I use it to get around the city. If I ride with my fiance into the city, but she leaves before me.
I have never used it. How reasonable is it? How is the
Oh,
bike?
the Pace?
Is the bike in good condition?
Bike is in excellent condition. They
you
do
know,
a great job maintaining. I cannot say enough about Pace Bike Share, whether you use it for recreation or whether you're, again, a lot of people I know use it for short distance transit around the city.
Right.
The quality is outstanding, very rideable.
Really?
Extremely easy to ride. And to use it is great. It's like $1 a half an hour or something like
Yeah.
that.
Mm-hmm.
It's super
And then you
cheap.
can leave it
then
anywhere.
You can literally
Yeah.
lock it up anywhere. You don't necessarily need to go dock to dock. You can lock it up at any public bike rack.
I've seen one abandoned just laying on the side of the road once, and
and
I was
you know
like,
what?
oh, that
They're
can't
gonna
be
get charged
good.
for that.
But you
Yeah.
know what? Yeah, and
Probably get stolen from somewhere.
listen, they figure that into their business model. They know that it's going to get abused here and there and things like that. And actually, they had a it was formerly Zagster. Now they've rebranded as Pace. Rochester was kind of their model for their dockless, system, and they really Rochester really was their. There was a huge success. It was fantastic. So it's really kind of helped that company take steps forward. We've been that model for them. So it's been wonderful.
Didn't they come out like really late in the season too?
They did, yeah.
Yeah,
It was unbelievable,
like
though, how
very
popular
late,
it became
yeah.
very
Yeah.
quickly. So
I
it was
probably
great.
used them like a dozen times at least, and usually if I'm riding, I have my own bike with
Right,
me.
right.
But
But
once in a
that's
while,
only because you set the meetings for a libertarian party so close to your house.
yeah, I know, right? It
Funny
makes
how-
it super
funny how that
convenient
works.
for me.
When you get an electric bike, now that's a
It's-
different story.
hey, it's
Electric
good.
bike,
Oh,
I love it.
Hey,
yeah,
it's
we
good to be
should
the
talk about
chairman.
those because those are.
That's a thing that as
Yeah.
far as legislation. But let's talk about bike lanes. Talking about that and really quickly, I think I believe in building bike lane networks. So not just bike lanes, bike paths, places where cyclists can practically get to and from the places that we actually go in our cities. What I don't like seeing is these strips of bike lanes that literally exist for a quarter mile for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
It's like saying, well, for this quarter mile, you're protected, and for the rest of it, you're on your own. And we have that. Listen, it's not just Rochester. That's in every city USA, just about. But if you look at even, I'm going to cite some cold weather cities. Minneapolis, I think 7-8% of the population there bike to work every day. And that's one of the coldest cities in our nation. Now they don't get quite as much snow as we do, but the biking infrastructure there is outstanding because they've built a bike lane network, whereas we are still fumbling our way through kind of finding. I love the progress that we've made on some level, but it's still very kind of fragmented.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll look at things like I see Winton Road. There's that quarter mile strip. Atlantic Ave is terrible to ride your bike on. So
It's terrible. Yeah.
I sometimes ride on the sidewalks.
I run. I'll tell you what. I hate to say this. When there's in places where there's little or no pedestrian traffic, like one or two people, and I'll just ride around them. I'll ride on the sidewalks in some spots. I will.
Yeah.
And I know just people call me out all the time for that, but to be perfectly honest, look, I'm as much as trying to create equity on our roads as humanly possible. I'm not going to sacrifice my life for it.
Yeah.
And I think we've turned off a generation of cyclists by saying you have to ride in the road, because most of my friends that bike casually, they're not doing that.
Yeah.
Me, yes, I have no problem doing that.
No, it's terrifying to ride.
It's terrifying.
Because you get some of those roads, and like I said, Atlantic is the example I ride on. It's supposed to speed limit's supposed to be 30. Everyone drives like 40 on that.
Well, I ride
and,
I work in in Henrietta area actually.
Yeah.
And I bike to
so-
work. So I'm biking down East Henrietta Road. Listen, there's bike lanes on East Henrietta Road.
There is.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah,
it is
right.
in
It's
places
not-
a 7-lane road. And the people aren't driving anywhere near the speed limit there.
No.
A lot of times I'll bike on the sidewalk there, and I hate to admit that, but there's like 4 people on the sidewalk, which
Yeah.
I ride around in the grass, and it's
do
no
that.
problem.
You know what area